As we continue with our technical training series, in this module I'm going to discuss configuring a player for local network publishing. Earlier I mentioned that there are 4 different methods for publishing to BrightSign players. You can publish direct via an SD card. You can publish over a local area network. You can publish via your own web server. We call this simple file networking. Or you can publish using the BrightSign network. In this module, I'll walk you through the steps to set up a player for publishing over a local area network. Remember that in this example, in this publishing method, BrightAuthor has a direct connection to the player on the local area network. That means both your PC running BrightAuthor and the BrightSign player are together on the same LAN. This method generally will not work across wide area networks where players are on different subnets behind different firewalls in other buildings. The general rule of thumb is if you can ping the player, this will work. If you can't ping the player, this won't work. The number of players to manage should not be large because using this method you can only publish to a single player at a time. And BrightAuthor actually writes the project directly to the player's memory card over the local area network. And you do get the opportunity to have a very basic information feedback status of the player returned to BrightAuthor, and I'll show you where that's found as we conclude this module. Before you begin, however, there are a few questions about your network you should be prepared to answer before you move into setup. First of all, what type of Ethernet connection will the player have? All of our players except one have a physical Ethernet connection on the back, and you simply connect the Ethernet cable and the player is on the LAN and ready to go. But you might be using Wi-Fi, in which case our XD line of players support an optional Wi-Fi module that needs to be installed and the player can operate in a Wi-Fi environment. In the case of Wi-Fi, before you begin, you'll need to know your Wi-Fi network ID, commonly called the SSID. This is the name of the network that gets broadcasts by the network, and you'll also need to know the login security key. The BrightSign player does not have a keyboard and mouse attached, and there's no way to simply browse to the Wi-Fi network in the building and enter the key. You need to know these in advance. You also need to know how IP addresses are assigned on your network. There are generally 2 ways to assign an IP address: dynamic, or so-called DHCP, which stands for Dynamic Host Control Protocol. This method is the easiest because it's automatic. In a network where DHCP is used, somewhere on the LAN is a server, and when a new device attaches, the server gives that device directly IP configuration information. If you do not have a DHCP server running on your local area network, you'll need to set up static or fixed addresses for the player, and in order to do that you'll need to know the IP address the player should have, the subnet mask that the player should be installed in, the gateway server to be used, and the domain name server or DNS server address. Without these 4 pieces of information, you're not ready to go. But if you have them, then you should proceed, unless you're dynamic, in which case all of this will be handled automatically. So with the answer to these 2 questions, is it a physical connection or a Wi-Fi connection? Are you running dynamic or static IP address configurations? You can proceed to set up your player. So here we are at my desktop. I'm going to put my blank SD card into my machine, and you'll see that that just now appeared here. It's drive I. The card is empty, so that it's ready to go. And if you remember, our cards must be formatted FAT. So if I get properties on this card and just double check that it is formatted FAT, in this case FAT32. The card is good to go, so it's there and ready. I'm going to start BrightAuthor and prepare my player for local area network publishing. The first thing to do in BrightAuthor is to make sure that this networking method is enabled. We call it local networking. I'm going to turn it on and say OK. The moment I do that, a Manage tab appears and other options throughout the application have now been activated to reflect this publishing method. I'm going to move to the Publish tab and choose a presentation that I've prepared in advance. I'm going to set this presentation to run all day, every day. In future modules, we'll discuss building presentations and scheduling them. For now, I'm simply going to drop that project on my screen, or in my calendar, I should say, and prepare my player with to receive it. The easiest way to get a player going in this environment is to simply choose New Unit with something here on the calendar ready to go. Choose New Unit and Publish. This is simultaneously going to allow me to set up my player, and it will push this first project to the player all in one step. I'm going to give my player a name, Ray's HD 1020. It's in Ray's office. This name and description are entirely at your discretion. They can be anything you want them to be. My player, it's an HD 1020, so I don't have Wi-Fi, but if I were going an XD route and needed to enable wireless, I would do so. Put my SSID and key here, but since I'm not, I'm going to leave that off. My wired connection is in first position. A quick check here on advanced lets me go and make sure that I'm set to automatically receive a DHCP address, which is the case in our network. Here in this building we use DHCP, so I don't need to worry about static addresses. But if static were my requirement, I would choose static. Here I would choose use the following IP address, and then I would have to populate these 4 fields with the data that I mentioned earlier: the IP address, subnet mask, default gateway, and DNS server addresses. DNS 2 and 3 are optional. They're fallback servers, but generally only these first 4 fields are required. In my network, everything is dynamic, so I choose dynamic and say OK. That's the right time zone. We do not need the diagnostic web server. I'll discuss this feature in another module. It's not important during setup. When setting up via local file networking, the local web server must be enabled. You'll see, in fact, I am not allowed here to turn it off, and a username and password are requested. The username and password can be anything you want them to be, but remember what you've done, because if you ever need to reconfigure BrightAuthor, you'll need to know that in order to access your player. This username and password are used to key BrightAuthor to that player on your LAN. This prevents anybody from downloading a copy of BrightAuthor and taking over control of your players without the correct username and password. Logging features should all be turned off. In other modules, we'll talk about what logging is for and how it can be used, but for now we leave that all off, and I'm ready to go. I will say OK. I will choose my SD card and say OK. The setup files are written to the project, to the card, and that included this schedule for this project. That card is now ready to go put in my player. So I'm going to remove the card from my laptop. I'll put it back in here briefly. You'll see that it kind of looks like the card might be empty, but in fact there is data there. It just doesn't take a lot of space, and so don't be worried. I'm going to eject this card and take it to my player, put that card in my player, and boot the player. I'm going to wait for the player to finish booting, and once it finishes booting, this project will immediately start to run because this project was included in the local setup. After the player has booted, and I'll know it's finished because this project is running, I can come here now, choose networked units, because this player now exists on the network, and I can directly enter the IP address of that player, which I happen to know is 10.1.0.75. Now, how did I know that, I hear you ask? Because in our network, everything is dynamically assigned. So how did I know that was the IP address of my player? Once my player is set up, I shut it down, remove the card, and boot it again. The player will display a BrightSign logo, and it will display also the IP address that it was assigned on the network. I then put the card back in, the player finishes booting and starts to run the project. That's how I know that my player is at this address. I say OK, and the player shows up available here for publishing. Let's just, for excitement, choose a different project to publish. I'm going to set it to run all day, every day. Choose that player and hit publish. And we see that my copy of BrightAuthor was successful sending that project and schedule out to my player. And I can now do this as often as I need with as many different projects and as many different items on the schedule. Whenever is required to send a schedule to the player, I simply choose the player and hit publish. The new project and schedule is sent to the player. My player is now set up and operating properly for local network publishing. Lastly, I mentioned that you will get some basic status information back from the player. The Manage tab here lets me see that player, how long it has been up and running since it was last booted, and what project the player is currently running. A right click will let me see some basic information about the player. I can see its serial number, the IP address that it's running at, the model of the player, and the firmware version that's running on the player. So that concludes setup of a player for local network publishing.